1995, a blue satellite dish appeared on rooftops across South Africa. It wasn't just a piece of technology, it was a signal, a declaration to the neighborhood that your family had crossed the threshold. You were middle class now, you'd made it. The dish cost a 2K to install, about a 10K in today's money. The subscription was a 200 a month. Expensive, yes, but worth it. Because with that dish came access to a world that SABC's 3 channels could never provide. American sitcoms, Hollywood blockbusters still warm from the cinema, and most importantly, live sport. Every Rugby World Cup match, every English Premier League game, every Champions League final. MultiChoice had created something rare in business, a genuine monopoly. There were no alternatives, no competitors, no substitutes. If you wanted premium entertainment in South Africa, you paid the DStv tax, and everyone paid it. By the early 2000s, the company was printing money. Subscriber numbers climbed past 5 million, then 10 million, then 15 million across Africa. The revenue poured in like a flood, and with each year, MultiChoice became more confident, more comfortable, more convinced of their own permanence. They raised prices every year, without fail. DStv Premium climbed from a 300 to a 400 to a 500 to a 600. Subscribers complained. They always complained, but they kept paying. Because where else were they going to watch the Springboks? Where else could they get SuperSport? This is where the story of MultiChoice becomes interesting. Because while they were busy milking their monopoly, something was happening underground. Literally underground. Fiber optic cables were being laid beneath South African streets. Quietly, methodically, city by city, suburb by suburb, the invisible wires were spreading. Telkom started rolling out fiber in the mid-2000s, then Vumatel, then Frogfoot, then OpenServe. The internet speed started climbing, 10 megabits per second, then 50, then 100, then 200. Suddenly, South African homes had the bandwidth to stream high-definition video without buffering. But MultiChoice didn't see it as a threat. They saw it as irrelevant. The executives went on record saying that streaming would never work in South Africa. The infrastructure wasn't ready. Data was too expensive. Customers preferred the curated experience of traditional television. They had a dozen reasons why their business model was safe. They believed every single one of them. In 2016, Netflix arrived. A 99 a month, no contract, no installation fee, no decoder rental. Cancel anytime. Thousands of movies and series available instantly on any device. The value proposition was so superior it was almost offensive. MultiChoice response. They laughed. They called it a fad. They said South Africans wouldn't pay for streaming when they already had DStv. They were wrong about everything. The first wave of cancellation started in 2017. Young professionals in their 20s and 30s, the cord cutters, the early adopters. MultiChoice didn't worry. These were fringe customers. The core audience, families, sports fans, older viewers, they'd never leave. They were locked in. But then something unexpected happened. Families started leaving too, because a 900 a month for DStv Premium had become impossible to justify when Netflix was a 99 and Amazon Prime was a 79. Even if you added Disney Plus and Showmax, you were still paying less than half of what DStv cost. The math didn't work anymore. By 2019, the subscriber bleed had become a hemorrhage. MultiChoice was losing customers faster than they could replace them. The South African market, once their crown jewel, was shrinking, and shrinking fast. The company tried to adapt. They launched Showmax back in 2015, a full year before Netflix arrived. But they treated it like a side project. A digital experiment, something to keep the board happy. The real business was still DStv, still the satellite, still the dish. They kept raising DStv prices to compensate for the subscriber losses, which only accelerated the exodus. It was a death spiral, and everyone could see it except the people running the company. By 2020, the financial cracks were starting to show. The share price that had once traded at a 140 was now limping along in the ATS. Analysts were downgrading their ratings. Investors were getting nervous. The golden goose was looking sickly. Then the pandemic hit, and it accelerated everything. Locked in their homes with nowhere to go, South Africans binge-watched Netflix, Disney Plus, and Amazon Prime. They realized they didn't miss DStv. They didn't miss the ads. They didn't miss the rigid package structures. They didn't miss paying a 900 a month for channels they never watched. The cord cutting turned into a stampede. By 2023, MultiChoice was in serious trouble. The kind of trouble that doesn't get fixed with a new marketing campaign or a discounted package. The kind of trouble that shows up on the balance sheet in numbers that make investors sick. Let me explain what technical insolvency means. It's a term accountants use when a company's liabilities exceed its assets. In plain English, the company owes more than it owns. The value of everything they possess, the satellites, the decoders, the broadcast centers, the intellectual property, is less than the debt they've accumulated. MultiChoice had become technically insolvent. A company with 15 million subscribers across Africa. A company with a 50 billion in annual revenue. A company that had dominated African media for 30 years. Broke. not cash poor. Actually, mathematically insolvent. How does that happen? Simple. They'd spent decades building infrastructure for a world that no longer existed. Billions poured into satellite technology, decoder manufacturing, installation networks, call centers, all of it optimized for traditional broadcasting. All of it now obsolete. The debt had piled up. Our 1 billion owed to creditors. Interest payments bleeding the company dry. And with subscribers fleeing, there was no way to grow their way out of the hole. The math was brutal, final, irreversible, and that's when the Vulture arrived. Canal Plus is a French media conglomerate controlled by Vincent Polo. He's 71 years old, a billionaire industrialist with a reputation for hostile takeovers and ruthless business tactics. He doesn't invest in companies because he likes their management or believes in their vision. He invests to extract value, to consolidate power, to win. Canal Plus already owned 35% of MultiChoice. They'd been patient shareholders for years, watching, waiting, letting the company bleed, and by late 2023, they decided it was time to make their move. In February 2024, Canal Plus launched a takeover bid. They offered a $1.25 per share to buy the 65% they didn't already own. It was a premium to the market price, yes, but it was a fraction of what the company had once been worth. This wasn't a friendly merger. This was a predator claiming its prey. MultiChoice board rejected the offer. They said it undervalued the company. They said they could turn things around. They said they had a plan. But everyone watching knew the truth. They were negotiating from a position of total weakness. Canal Plus didn't flinch. They could wait. They controlled a third of the company. They could increase pressure. They could force the issue. And in May 2024, they did exactly that. They increased their offer to a $1.05 per share, lower than the first bid. That's what happens when you're buying a sinking ship. You wait for the water to rise, then you negotiate a better price. But why did Canal Plus want MultiChoice at all? If the company was so broken, why spend billions to acquire it? The answer is Africa. MultiChoice might be dying in South Africa, but they still control million subscribers across the continent. Nigeria, Kenya, Ghana, Angola, Zambia, Zimbabwe. Countries where streaming infrastructure was still years behind. Countries where DStv was still the dominant player. Countries that represented the last untapped frontier of traditional television. Canal Plus wasn't buying MultiChoice to save South African television. They were buying it to control African media distribution, to own the infrastructure, to have a platform for their global war against Netflix, Disney Plus, and Amazon Prime. This was a strategic play dressed up in corporate language. A French company taking control of Africa's largest media empire. The optics were terrible, the symbolism worse. But business isn't about optics, it's about power. And Canal Plus was about to have a lot of it. Back in South Africa, there was one asset still keeping MultiChoice alive. One product that customers refused to abandon no matter how much they hated DStv, SuperSport. South Africans love their sport with an intensity that borders on religious. Rugby, cricket, football, the Springboks, the Proteas, the Premier League, the Champions League. For 25 years, if you wanted to watch any of it live, you needed SuperSport. MultiChoice had spent billions locking up exclusive rights to every major sporting event that mattered. It was the fortress, the moat, the one thing that made DStv indispensable. Customers who'd cancelled everything else still kept their subscriptions purely for SuperSport. It was the shield protecting MultiChoice from total collapse. But shields crack. And by 2024, SuperSport's shield was showing serious fractures. The SABC, South Africa's public broadcaster, had declared war. They argued that MultiChoice was hoarding sporting events of national importance, that the Springboks playing in a World Cup final shouldn't be locked behind a 500 paywall, that every South African, regardless of income, should have access to national sporting moments. The legal battles escalated. The political pressure mounted. The Independent Communications Authority of South Africa started making noises about breaking up SuperSport's monopoly. Suddenly, those exclusive rights didn't look quite so exclusive anymore. Then the international streaming giants made their move. Amazon Prime acquired rights to Premier League matches in the UK. Apple TV Plus started bidding for Champions League rights. DAZN, a sports streaming service, launched aggressive expansion plans across Europe and was eyeing Africa. The entire sports broadcasting model was shifting. The rights that SuperSport had paid billions for over decades were becoming commodities. Available on multiple platforms, streamed on demand, no satellite dish required. If SuperSport lost exclusive access to the Premier League, what was the point of keeping DStv? If the Springboks matches moved to free-to-air television, why pay a $500 a month? The fortress walls were crumbling, and everyone inside could hear the stones falling. This is where desperation shows itself, because MultiChoice knew the Canal Plus takeover was inevitable. They knew their subscriber base was collapsing. They knew they needed a miracle, so they made a bet. A $2 billion bet on something called Showmax 2.0. In late 2024, MultiChoice announced a partnership with Comcast, the American media giant that owns NBC Universal and the Peacock streaming service. Comcast would inject technology, content libraries, and international credibility into Showmax. In return, they'd get equity in what MultiChoice was positioning as Africa's streaming champion. The pitch was compelling. Showmax would combine African original content which Netflix still struggled to produce at scale, with sports streaming through SuperSport integration. It would have live football, rugby, cricket. It would have local series and movies that reflected African stories and experiences. It would have the Comcast technology stack to compete with the global giants. On paper, it made sense. In execution, it was probably 5 years too late. Showmax 2.0 launched with fanfare. New interface, better streaming quality, more content, aggressive pricing at $99 per month to match Netflix. They even bundled it with DStv packages to stop the bleeding. But the fundamental problem remained: they were trying to compete in a market that was already saturated. Netflix had 2 million South African subscribers and hundreds of millions globally. Disney Plus had the entire Marvel, Star Wars, and Pixar catalog. Amazon Prime had Lord of the Rings and Thursday Night Football. Apple TV Plus was burning billions on prestige content. What did Showmax have? African content, sports streaming, local knowledge, important advantages, yes. But were they enough to pull subscribers away from established platforms? Were they enough to justify the $2 billion investment? Were they enough to save the company? The honest answer is probably not, but it's the only play MultiChoice has left. They've lost the satellite war. They're losing the sports monopoly. The Canal Plus takeover is stripping away their independence. Showmax 2.0 is the Hail Mary pass in the final seconds. The desperate heave toward the end zone as time expires. Maybe it works. Maybe Comcast technology and MultiChoice African expertise create something genuinely competitive. Maybe African audiences embrace it. Maybe it becomes profitable enough to justify the investment. Or maybe it's too little, too late. Maybe the market has moved on. Maybe Netflix, Disney Plus, and Amazon Prime have already carved up the streaming landscape in ways that can't be reversed. Maybe Showmax 2.0 is just a more expensive way to watch the company die. The blue satellite dish that once meant you'd arrived is now a relic. A reminder of an era when entertainment was expensive, exclusive, and controlled by a single monopoly. That era is over. Fiber killed the satellite. Streaming killed the broadcast. Choice killed the monopoly. MultiChoice had 30 years to see it coming. They had the resources, the talent, the first mover advantage in streaming. They could have been Africa's Netflix. They could have pivoted early, invested heavily, and owned the digital future. Instead, they protected their dying business model until it was too late to save. Canal Plus will complete the takeover. They'll cut the company, cut costs, consolidate operations, focus on the profitable African markets, and let South Africa slowly fade. DStv will become a zombie brand, a name without a soul, a product that exists because changing takes effort, not because anyone actually wants it. The dish on the roof will come down, one house at a time, one cancelled subscription at a time, until all that's left is a memory of what it meant to have one. A status symbol that became a punchline, an empire that became a cautionary tale. This is how monopolies die in the digital age. Not because someone builds a better mousetrap, but because someone makes the mousetrap obsolete. Netflix didn't beat DStv by being better television. They won by making television irrelevant. And now, as the dish comes down and the fiber lights up, as the French take control and the streaming wars rage on, we are left with one question: how does a billion-dollar monopoly with 30 years of dominance lose it all? The answer is simple. They forgot that empires only last as long as the world needs what they're selling. The moment the world moves on, the empire falls. No matter how big the dish, no matter how blue. Welcome to the death of the monopoly. This is what happens when you stop innovating and start believing your own press releases. This is the price of arrogance. And MultiChoice is paying it in full.